for East Perth. Alan Quartermain, who won a Sandover medal, was out due to suspension. His temper got the better of him early in the final series. We spoke about Tony McCall having to make the hard decision. There was a player called Peter Barr, if you remember. He missed out on playing in the grand final after playing 19 of the 21 home and away games. And there was a special incentive for a couple of individuals, and they're both here. We're about to speak to one of them shortly. Gary Gillespie and Phil Tierney had played in all previous grand final losses, and they had almost had enough. And Gary Bygraves, Cowboy as he was affectionately known, we'll hear from him, who recently, with Devon Perry, was inducted in the East Perth Hall of Fame, kicked 4 goals and 3 against the wind in the third term. That was certainly a deciding factor. Brownie decided, after winning the toss, he kicked into a strong breeze, and it was a northwester, if I recall, on that day. East Perth trailed by 13 points at quarter time, but with the aid of the breeze in the second term, they kicked 4 goals to 0 in the second quarter, led by 15, and won by 15 at the end. The odd shower rolled through, it was an overcast sky, and there was a lot of East Perth people very, very nervous. But the hoodoo was broken. Can I also just say, it's also the 100th anniversary of the 1922 Premiership side. Unfortunately, some of those people couldn't make it here today. But there's the flag there, just on your right, just straight down, 1922, the 100-year celebration of that decade where East Perth won numerous premierships during the 1920s. They certainly were. All right, let's start reliving 1972. And firstly, I'd like to welcome, affectionately known as Dick, Richard Michalczyk, and the Flea, Gary Gillespie. Big round of applause. And as Gary said, it's a big step up here. There you go, Gary, take a seat. Great to see you. 50 years on. The boy from Narrabeen, there he is, Richard Michalczyk. Debut for East Perth, midway through 1969, as I mentioned, Gary Gillespie was there during the 60s, where we just couldn't bloody win one, could we, Gary?
No, very hard in those days, mate.
What do you say someone like Chatty, who was just an outstanding footballer for East Perth, 269 games, and he didn't have the privilege, like you now, and you just hung on, 1972 to win that premiership?
Yeah, it was very disappointing for Chatty. Like, he just gave everything in his whole career. And during 1972, he copped a couple of very bad knocks in the kidney, and he was bleeding, and he just got the information to give it away.
Number 17?
Correct.
There you go. The memory's not bad. I reckon it's good with dementia. You remember the old days, but you forget what happened recently. Now, the Michalczyk name has been synonymous with East Perth. Tell us about the family connection. We know George. We know, of course, yourself, Richard, and there's a few other people around as well.
Yeah, my brother Eddie down there, he played a few games for East Perth. Essentially, I started first, followed by Eddie, and then George took over and played 100 and something games for East Perth and finished up here coaching West Perth. So that was the Michalczyk clan in essence.
What did Brownie used to call you? What had a nickname with a Polish name like that nobody could spell?
He had a lot of names for me. And a lot of other people, for that matter.
You were a tough centre-half back. Tell us about the pressure that was on players like yourself in 1972, because we had gone through those years in the 60s. Cable carved us up in 3 consecutive grand finals of Perth, and of course Mal Atwell. And then our very own Polly Farmer contributed in 69 and 71. So how much pressure in the lead up to that game was there on this 72 team?
Well, I said I had a meal with Brownie the other day with a few other people, and I said that's one of the greatest decisions you ever made in your life, Brownie, getting rid of that and call out the centre half back. But you got to trigger something, and that was the trigger that sort of won us the premiership.
I believe, and I'm going to speak to Noddy about that, I believe he was pretty dark, Mal. He was pretty dark when he was swung to the flank, and you went, of course, into the corridor at centre half back.
Dark? He's still dark. I used to tell him, I said, now Noddy, you know, I got pace and I want to turn attack and defence out of the centre half back line. Get over in your bloody flank and stay there. I remember the grand final very vividly because I ended up with bloody lumps in the back of my head, and every time I turned around it was Noddy. Dashing the ball down so I couldn't take a mark, or you know, then I'd go and he'd be over the wing to play with swing to the wing, and I'd go and try and help him. What's not? He saw me coming, so he'd run out of bounds with the ball in his hand, which you couldn't do today. He'd do anything for me to get a stat, you know.
But deep down inside, he wasn't a bad player, was he, Richard?
Yeah, I like him in mine. I like him as my wingman.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of wingmen, of course, Gary, you occupied that position with distinction. What you lacked in stature, you certainly made up in courage. Tell us about the role of a wingman in the early 70s and during the 60s and how important a position it was.
With the in comparison to today, like you were one-on-one, and it was our job to really to stop the wingman on the day, and that's the way we played. We just didn't go much past the half-forward line or the half-back line, and that did our job that way.
You were quite celebrated because you're part of a centre line that was famous for East Perth. You started with the likes of Chatty and even Sid Jackson playing in the middle, and you were playing on the other wing. Not a bad centre line.
Oh, those two players were bloody brilliant. You know, like I was just the little low one on the other side.
No, seriously, mate, you had a stellar career. Tell us about 1972. John Burns, of course, took over the centre position. Unfortunately, can't be here. I think he's overseas. But tell us about the impact that John Burns had in that year.
John was, played in Tasmania at a state side, and we got hold of him from over there, and he started playing with us in 1970, and we didn't know much about him at that time, but we soon found out that he was super quick and just a brilliant footballer overall, and his temperament was most probably the thing that led his downfall, but Brownie soon made sure that changed, and he was just one of the best centremen I've seen. He could run virtually as low, and you could still catch him. It was just brilliant.
You mentioned his temperament, so he was a bit fiery.
Not so much fiery. He just thought, you know, like he was there to do his job, and he was going to do it his way and no one else's way, sort of thing. But you know, like he soon changed his attitude, and he played a great game in that 72 grand final on Colin Tully, I think it was.
Tell us about Brownie as a captain coach.
Well, I've got to be careful. Well, Brownie was one of those coaches, if you didn't do it his way or that, you were gone, and that's, but he was a great coach. He knew everything about the opposition players, and you know, he'd come up to you and he'd tell you what he wanted you to do, and if you didn't do it, well, you were in bloody trouble. And but yeah, a great coach and a great fellow with it. So yeah.
Saying that, and I threw this question to him when I was speaking to him on radio the other day. I asked him whether, because he won the '69 Sandover medal, he's a pretty outstanding footballer. Do you think it was because you saw him play during the '60s as a footballer? Was he a better footballer or a better coach in your eyes?
I think he was good in both aspects. He, you know, like when he first came down, like we didn't know a lot about him, but he was a player that was very unselfish with the ball, and at centre forward he would pass it out to players running past and everything like that. And it certainly changed our way of playing. And then when he took over coaching, we had 4 coaches in my career: Jack Sheedy, Kevin Murray, Chatty, and Mel, and they're all different, but Mel brought into something that I think united the side to a better degree than what we'd done in the years that we lost the grand final, and I think that's in '72 we certainly changed our attitude. We didn't have a star-studded side, it was just a side that was completely in playing the way Brownie wanted to do, and our teamwork was totally different, and we just become a side that looked after one another.
Come back to you with a couple of final questions. Now, Richard, you mentioned Noddy played on one flank, and I see the other fella here, Gary Martin, played on the other flank, and had Gary Michalczyk as a full back. Tell us about Michalczyk, tell us about Martin. Of course, you would have combined very closely together during that 72.
Well, Michalczyk used to whinge like Noddy used to whinge. He didn't get much of the ball because our centre half back line was impenetrable, you know. But no, Marty and Noddy as wingmen were, you know, I mean, we were solid, you know, we looked after each other, and it's one of the main reasons I think, you know, we got what we did.
You had Gary Michalczyk as full-back, and it's really sad, of course, recently that Kenny Deards, a back pocket player, left us, so we spare a thought for him. But tell us about that defensive unit and how important it was. When Brownie said we are kicking into the breeze in the first term, and Clement, of course, hit the front in that first quarter. Do you remember that first term? Did you feel it was the right decision to make, considering a bit of a gusty day?
Well, I don't remember much about it, but I remember we had the man up in the first quarter kicking into the breeze, and unlike today, you know, I just can't understand why the backmen play behind the forwards. I just couldn't understand. I always backed my pace and my judgment and that, and I know Marty and that did as well, because we played in front of our forwards, you know, to sort of read the play and adapt that way. And I know, I mean, we were concentrating like hell, because I mean, we were called the bridesmaids, you know, for too long. We're talking about 6 years out of 71 excluded. And that gave us the shits, you know, and Brownie used to remind us of that. You know, I only played in 3, but and we got flogged in 69 and 71. And it was a redemption day, so it was, you know, everyone, you know, to own up and, you know, do their bit, which we did.
It's interesting, when you look at Brownie, you look at Vernon Howell, who was the coach at Claremont, couldn't have been poles apart as far as the character is concerned. Now, you decided to leave East Perth and fancy yourself at North Melbourne, and there was a bit of a period where you were out of football, wasn't there?
You only left East Perth because, you know, Noddy was just whinging that much. You know. Something had to give, so I just said, I'll make it easy for you, Noddy, you can have your some back position and I'll walk. But no, yeah, I went to North Adelaide, West Adelaide. The money was good. I mean, you know, when you're 22, cheeky, not taking any notice from anyone, just thinking driven by money. And I mean, we were just talking before that, you know, people just don't believe when I tell them the story. Back in the 70s, we used to get paid $25 a win and $4 if we lost. So if you lost the grand final, you got $4, so quite should have played in a grand final. But that's okay, but yeah, so I stood out of football for 6 months. I made 2 trips back to the club to sort of beg for my clearance. Anyway, that's a long story. I don't want to go into any detail there, but yeah, it was just all money driven at the time. I would have loved to stay with East Perth. You know, we had a bloody good team, a young team, and a bloody good team. I'm sure we could have added 73 and onward. That's my view of that. But yeah, so then North come over and deal was done and ended up at North.
And of course, you must be also very proud that the next generation of the Cox family, in the Michalczyk family, being Dean Cox, of course, played in the grand final for East Perth as well and won the Simpson medal.
Yeah, we're all there, the Michalczyk playing again. Yeah, he's an extraordinary footballer, and he just added another dimension to the ruck, you know, dimensions, and yeah, he's virtually the son I never had, you know. I live in Sydney, he lived with me for 3 months until Kerry over to settle, and then he lived in bloody Glebe, you know, first house, the second house in Glebe, and I thought, shit, I'm getting out of here, so I moved to the Central Coast. And I think I still see more room now than I did when I was bloody hour and a quarter away, but no, extraordinary person, one of the greatest ruckmen, if not the best ruckman of our time. But yeah, and you know, he's doing a great job with Sydney Swans at the moment. So watch this space about where he goes in the coaching.
Yeah, I've heard a few rumours, let me tell you, Richard. I might talk to you a bit later. Finally, how did you get your nickname, The Flea?
I really don't know about telling that story. It was given to me by a fellow that played with East Perth, Brian McGregor, and we were out this night, and I won't go into any. But anyway,
it wasn't a Jordan Goey situation, was it?
No. But yeah, Brian had gone to the toilet, and you know, he came back, and I'd moved into where he was. He just let go, you effing flea. And, that's where it started, but I'm not saying what else happened there.
Ladies and gentlemen, Gary Gillespie and Richard Michalczyk, give them a big round of applause. Great to see Gary, of course, 197 games with East Perth. and one of the real cult figures during